Chapter 1. The Vanishing and the Council of War. The air was still, heavy with a silence that was more terrifying than any roar of a cursed spirit. It was the silence of an absent god. The assembled sorcerers stood on a desolate, scarred patch of land, a battlefield prepared for a clash of titans. The ground, a mix of pulverized rock and scorched earth, was a testament to the immense power they expected to witness. They had been waiting for Satoru Gojo. A dozen of the most powerful remaining Jujutsu sorcerers, Yuta Okotsu, Maki Zenin, Kinji Hikari, Hiromi Higuruma, and Yuji Itadori among them, were poised, their cursed energy coiled and ready. Their mission was to provide support, to be a failsafe, but in their hearts, they all knew they were nothing more than spectators to a grand duel that would decide the fate of their world. But the flash of cursed energy never came. The cerulean blue of a six eyes and limitless technique never painted the sky. There was no thunderous clash of domains, no earth-shattering shockwave. There was only absence. One moment they were waiting. The next, a profound, crushing reality settled in. Satoru Gojo was not coming, not late, not caught up. Gone. The silence was broken by the sharp, metallic chink of Maki's blade as she shifted her stance, a movement born of instinctual unease. Yuta's eyes, usually a calm sea of dark violet, were wide with a dawning horror. He felt the vast, empty space where Gojo's immeasurable cursed energy should have been. It wasn't just a physical absence. It was a cosmic one, like a star that had simply winked out of existence without so much as a supernova. "He's not here," Hikari said, his voice flat, his usual playful swagger completely gone. He looked at his hand, as if expecting the phantom feeling of Gojo's raw power to return, but there was nothing. Did he get sealed again? A collective shake of heads. Sealing would have left a trace, a disturbance in the flow of cursed energy, a ripple that would still be felt. This was different. This was a final, irreversible nullification. Kenjaku, the puppet master, had won, not through a climactic battle, but through an insidious, quiet victory that removed the one obstacle in his path before the final act had even begun. The Jujutsu world's ultimate failsafe, the lone hero who single-handedly maintained the balance of power, was gone. The battlefield became a mausoleum, a monument to a battle that never was. The sorcerers retreated, the weight of their failure pressing on them like a physical force. They gathered in a secure, reinforced chamber at the old Jujutsu High, the atmosphere heavy with dread and unresolved grief. Shoko Ieri, their medical sorcerer, stood with her head bowed, her hands trembling. Even her potent reverse curse technique could not heal a wound like this, a wound in the very fabric of their reality. It was Yuji who finally broke the suffocating silence of the Council of War. His face was grim, his eyes burning with an unshakable resolve that had been forged in the crucible of his own suffering. He had lost his mentor, his friends, and his home. But he had also found a new purpose. "We have to go on," he said, his voice low but firm. The words, simple as they were, cut through the despair. He looked at each of them, meeting their gazes with an intensity that held no room for doubt. "Gojo-sensei, he always carried the weight of everything on his own. We can't do that. We can't afford to. The world can't afford it." Yuta looked at him, his expression a mix of awe and sorrow. "Yuji, he was our last resort. The only one who could. He was the past," Yuji interrupted, his voice gaining strength. "Our society's whole philosophy was wrong. We relied on a single person to fix all our problems, and look where it got us. Now it's on all of us. This is a team fight, a collective war." He then did something none of them expected. He held out his fist, and from the tips of his fingers, a faint, ethereal glow emanated, not cursed energy, but something else entirely. It pulsed with a strange, otherworldly rhythm. "I can hurt him," Yuji said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Where it counts. Where no one else can." He went on to explain his newfound abilities, a result of his time as Sukuna's vessel, and his lineage from Kenjaku. His physical strikes, he revealed, could directly affect and damage the soul. He had honed this ability, discovering he could not only harm, but manipulate the souls of others. He spoke of a new, complex technique he had mastered, soul swapping. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Shoko's eyes, wide with disbelief, met Yuji's. She had seen the impossible, but this was a new level of anomaly. The plan to rescue Megumi Fushiguro, once a near-impossible dream, suddenly became a tangible, albeit fraught, possibility. Yuta, his mind racing, began to connect the pieces. Yuji's ability wasn't a side effect. It was the key. He was the one piece of the puzzle that made the impossible mission possible. The entire strategic landscape shifted in that instant. It was no longer a matter of overwhelming force. It was a delicate surgical strike. Higuruma, the calculating and meticulous lawyer, leaned forward. So the objective is no longer simple annihilation. It's soul extraction. He looked at the others. That changes everything. And so, the new three-phase assault doctrine was born. Yuta, as the new de facto leader, laid out the plan with the calm, methodical precision of a master strategist. He drew upon his vast cursed energy reserves and his understanding of each person's unique abilities. Maki's perfect heavenly restriction made her a ghost in the machine, a physical counter to Sukuna's reliance on cursed energy. Hikari's immortality made him the ultimate punching bag, a walking, regenerating wall of infinite cursed energy. Higuruma and Hana would be the tactical nullifiers, disarming Sukuna's techniques, and Yuji was the catalyst, the final and most crucial piece of the puzzle. The Council of War, once a den of despair, was now a furnace of grim determination. Gojo's absence had forced them to evolve, to reevaluate their entire philosophy of strength. The old paradigm was dead. The era of the lone hero was over. The mission to rescue Megumi, and by extension save their world, had officially begun. The collective war was upon them, and for the first time, they felt the weight not of one man's burden, but of their shared collective strength. Chapter 2: The Bait and the Trap. The plan was set in motion. The designated battleground was a Culling Game colony in a forgotten corner of Tokyo, its urban decay and strategic isolation making it the perfect stage for a controlled conflict. The shattered skyscrapers and overgrown streets were already littered with the corpses of lesser curses, drawn and then summarily dispatched by the overwhelming power of the approaching sorcerers. The advance party consisted of two figures who represented a perfect duality: Kinji Hikari, whose cursed energy was so volatile it shimmered around him like a heat haze, and Maki Zenin, whose complete absence of cursed energy rendered her an almost undetectable ghost. They moved with a synchronized purpose, a lethal ballet of two opposite extremes. Hikari's presence was a blaring siren, a beacon of immense cursed energy designed to draw the attention of the apex predator they sought. Maki, on the other hand, was a whisper in the wind, her movements silent, her aura a void that Sukuna's sensing abilities would struggle to register. Suddenly, a flicker of motion, not a sound, not a surge of cursed energy, but a subtle distortion in the air itself. And then, he was there. Ryomen Sukuna, the king of curses, stood atop a crumbled building, his figure a stark silhouette against the pale, bruised sky. He was in Megumi's body, yet his presence was monstrous, radiating a cold, ancient malice that made the very air crackle. He looked down at the two sorcerers with an air of profound boredom, a predator sizing up two particularly pathetic-looking morsels. "Is this the best you can offer?" Sukuna's voice, a gravelly echo of Megumi's, filled the space. "Where is the honored one? Did he get lost on his way to his glorious death?" Hikari grinned, a wide, challenging smile that was completely unhinged. "He's busy. You're getting the B team." Maki didn't speak. She simply vanished, her perfected heavenly restriction allowing her to move at a speed that transcended the limits of cursed energy-powered sorcerers. She was already behind him, her cursed tool, the split-soul katana, gleaming in her hand. Sukuna's smile widened, a cruel, amused twist of his lips. He didn't turn. Instead, with a casual flick of his wrist, a series of invisible slashes, cleave and dismantle, erupted in a spiderweb pattern. The attacks, which automatically adjusted their power to the cursed energy of the target, tore through the space where Maki had just been. But she was already gone, having predicted the attack and repositioned herself. "A simple trick," Sukuna scoffed, but a flicker of something new, irritation, crossed his face. This was the trap. Sukuna's innate technique Shrine was designed for a world where cursed energy was the currency of power. It was the ultimate, all-encompassing offensive, but it had a critical weakness against an opponent who operated outside of its rules. Maki was that opponent. Her body was a physical anomaly, a perfect martial counter to his slash-based techniques, which were optimized to deal with cursed energy reinforcement. She was a threat he couldn't simply cut. At that moment, Hikari unleashed his own domain. A blinding flash of light enveloped the area as his idle Death Gamble domain expansion materialized. It wasn't a domain meant for violence, but for luck. A stylized pachinko parlor appeared around Sukuna, forcing the King of Curses into a game he didn't understand. The air hummed with the cheerful, maddeningly out-of-place jingle of a pop song. "You call this a domain?" Sukuna sneered, but he was already being forced to expend cursed energy to defend against the information-heavy, non-damaging space. Hikari, having hit the jackpot, was now in his immortal state. A radiant aura of limitless cursed energy pulsed around him. He charged, a human battering ram of pure, untamed force. Sukuna's cleave attacks tore into Hikari, 1,000 lacerations appearing on his body in an instant. But with the same speed, the wounds sealed, the torn flesh knitting itself back together with effortless, unnatural speed. The sheer output of Sukari's cursed technique was no match for the automatic reverse curse technique granted by Hikari's jackpot. The battle became a brutal, one-sided spectacle of attrition. Sukuna, accustomed to ending fights in a single strike, was forced into a prolonged engagement. He was an unstoppable force meeting an immovable object. Every slash, every powerful blow he landed on Hikari was rendered meaningless. He was bleeding cursed energy, a resource even he could not replenish infinitely. Concurrently, Maki was a phantom menace. She would appear from his blind spots, a flash of motion too fast for the eye, and land crippling physical blows. Her strength, honed to a supernatural degree by her heavenly restriction, was enough to shake Sukuna, forcing him to engage in pure, close-quarters combat, a domain where his reliance on his cursed technique was a handicap. "You're a nuisance," Sukuna bellowed, the veneer of his cool arrogance beginning to crack. "An insect, and yet you do not die." This was the core of Phase 1, the attrition model. Hikari absorbed the punishment, a living shield of regenerating cursed energy, while Maki exploited the tactical vacuum created by his presence. Sukuna was forced to expend vast amounts of cursed energy, not to defeat them, but simply to keep up with them, to counter attacks that were a mockery of his power. The plan was working. The King of Curses, who had sought a worthy intellectual and physical rival, had instead found himself trapped in a tedious, humiliating war of attrition against two opponents he considered beneath him. His overconfidence had become the very thing that was draining his power, and the stage was being set for the next, more precise phase of their collective attack. Chapter 3: The Nullification Window. The battle raged on, a ceaseless, grinding war of attrition that was slowly but surely taking its toll. Sukuna's overconfidence, once a source of strength, was now a fatal flaw. He was caught in a loop of his own making, a king fighting what he considered to be peasants, and each blow he landed was met with an absurd, unending resilience. The cheerful jingle of Hikari's domain, now stuck on an endless loop, had become a maddening torture, a mocking soundtrack to his gradual defeat. His powerful cleave and dismantle attacks, which had once carved up opponents with surgical precision, were now being wasted on a man who regenerated faster than he could cut. Then, the signal was given. A subtle nod from Yuji, watching from the periphery, and the first stage of the collective assault came to an end. Hikari, having absorbed an inhuman amount of punishment, disengaged with a final, booming laugh. "Your turn, King of Curses. Don't let the prosecutor get you." As if on cue, the pachinko parlor domain flickered and vanished, replaced by an unsettling, almost sacred courtroom. The air crackled with a new, somber energy. Hiromi Higuruma, the juridical sorcerer, stood before Sukuna, his face impassive, his gaze a silent judgment. This was the deadly sentencing domain, a non-lethal, absolute hit technique that trapped its target in a trial with an unbreakable set of rules. Sukuna, momentarily disoriented by the shift in his reality, sneered. "A trial? Do you intend to judge me, human?" "I do," Higuruma replied, his voice calm and clear. The trial began with a series of accusations: mass murder, wanton destruction, and the illegal possession of a cursed object, the 10 Shadows technique. The evidence was irrefutable. Sukuna, unable to counter the charges, was found guilty. The verdict was rendered, and the domain's power manifested as the confiscation of a cursed technique. The plan was to remove his most valuable asset, the 10 Shadows technique, which had been so critical in the original timeline's battle against Gojo. The domain's choice was precise, targeting the foreign technique within Megumi's body, rather than Sukuna's native shrine. A shimmering, transparent orb detached from Sukuna's form, a spectral representation of the confiscated power. Just as the orb was sealed away, a new presence emerged. Hana Kurusu, the vessel of the ancient sorcerer angel, descended from above, her form bathed in a soft, ethereal light. She raised her hand, and from it, a cascade of celestial energy rained down. This was Jacob's ladder, a cursed technique with the power to extinguish all others, to cleanse cursed objects, and to banish curses. It was the ultimate nullifier. "Megumi!" Hana cried, her voice filled with a desperate plea. The beam of light, pure and incandescent, struck Sukuna's body. The king roared, not with pain, but with a sudden, profound discomfort. He felt his cursed energy, his very being unraveled by the purifying light. The technique was an absolute counter to his existence. It was designed to hurt his soul, to exorcise him from Megumi's body. But a critical vulnerability in the plan, and in Hana herself, was exposed. Hana's love for Megumi caused her to hesitate. The light flickered, its intensity waning as she pulled her punch, unwilling to deliver a blow that might harm the man she was trying to save. Sukuna, ever the opportunist, seized on this sliver of hesitation. He reasserted a portion of his cursed energy, a protective shroud that deflected the full force of the attack. It wasn't a failure, but it wasn't a complete success either. The window was closing. That's when Yuta Okotsu, the new strategic backbone of the collective, stepped in. His immense cursed energy swelled around him, and the Queen of Curses, Rika, materialized behind him, a menacing phantom of pure cursed energy. Yuta had already copied Hana's technique, a contingency plan for just such a moment of hesitation. He could see the weakness in Sukuna's cursed energy output, the fatigue from the prolonged war of attrition, and the instability of his soul after the partial cleanse from Hana. With a cold, surgical precision that was a stark contrast to Hana's emotional plea, Yuta raised his hand. The same divine light, a copied Jacob's ladder, began to form in his palm. This was the second, less compromised strike. It was a testament to the new paradigm of collective strength. One person's weakness, a narrative flaw in the original story, was now circumvented by another's versatility. The light pulsed, ready to be unleashed. The stage was now perfectly set for the final, most delicate and crucial phase of the assault. The King of Curses was disarmed, weakened, and on the brink of being completely nullified. The rest was up to Yuji. Chapter 4. The Final Strike. The air in the courtroom domain was a volatile mix of despair and resolve. Hana's partial strike with Jacob's ladder had failed to fully exorcise Sukuna, but it had accomplished its secondary purpose. It had destabilized his connection to Megumi's body, revealing a crack in his control. Yuta stood poised, a second, more potent Jacob's ladder forming in his hand, a cold and clinical weapon ready to finish the job. But Sukuna, ever the master of gambits, had one final card to play. As Yuta prepared to unleash his copied technique, a faint, almost imperceptible black shadow began to form around Sukuna's feet. It was a ripple, a tactical subversion that Higuruma's domain had not accounted for. The deadly sentencing domain could confiscate a cursed technique, but it was not designed to counter the absolute mastery of a sorcerer like Sukuna. He hadn't lost the 10 shadows. He had merely, with a subtle shift of his soul, willed the technique to reside in a deeper layer of Megumi's consciousness, a space that the domain could not reach. The orb Higuruma had confiscated was not the core of the technique, but a tactical front, a phantom designed to deceive. It was a bluff, an act of intellectual arrogance that had paid off. You think a simple trial can take from me what I have mastered over 1,000 years? Sukuna's voice, though still raw with irritation, held a note of smug triumph. You were right, brat. I am overconfident, but my overconfidence is rooted in a power you cannot even comprehend. A shadow writhed beneath him, and then, with a familiar, chilling howl, the ultimate Shikigami burst forth. Not as the full-fledged colossal beast from the original timeline, but as a smaller, more contained Mahoraga, its cursed energy still immense, its wheel spinning with silent menace. The nullification window, the delicate tactical opening they had fought so hard to create, was shattered in an instant. The plan had a fatal flaw. They had assumed Sukuna's power could be taken. They had underestimated his raw genius, his ancient knowledge of cursed energy. Yuta, get ready to move! Yuji roared, his voice laced with a newfound urgency. We're still on. Higuruma, can you do anything? Higuruma, his brow furrowed in concentration, shook his head. The technique is still there. It's a fundamental property of his cursed energy now. We have to improvise. At that moment, the final phase began not with a precise, calculated strike, but with a desperate, all-out blitz. Yuji lunged forward, a barrage of physical blows raining down on Sukuna. His attacks, honed to perfection, were a series of blindingly fast jabs and kicks. With each strike, a shimmering black light, a black flash, erupted, a physical representation of his ability to pierce the veil between flesh and soul. Sukuna, occupied with the manifestation of Mahoraga and the sudden assault, was on the back foot. The black flashes, unlike the slashes of cleave, were not aimed at his body, but at the very essence of his being. They were concussive blows that directly struck his soul, disrupting his connection to Megumi and momentarily stunning him. This was Yuji's purpose, his ultimate role as the catalyst. He was no longer a mere cog in the machine, or a vessel. He was the only sorcerer capable of landing the final, decisive blow against a being as powerful as Sukuna. With the 10 shadows now a lurking threat and the tactical nullification incomplete, the mission to rescue Megumi had become an even more precarious, high-stakes gamble. As Sukuna struggled to regain his footing, Yuji began a complex, ritualistic series of gestures. He had learned the ancient, forbidden art of soul manipulation, not from books or scrolls, but from the fragments of knowledge left by Kenjaku and the echoes of his time as Sukuna's vessel. With the last of his cursed energy, he executed the soul-swapping technique. A shimmering spectral link formed between Yuji and Sukuna, a transient bridge of consciousness. For a brief, agonizing moment, their souls were intertwined. Yuji's soul, pure and uncorrupted, entered Sukuna's vessel. In that infinitesimal window of time, he saw it all. The broken, shattered remnants of Megumi's consciousness, pushed to the farthest reaches of his own mind, a prisoner in his own body. He felt the cold, ancient malice of Sukuna, a boundless sea of darkness and ego, a being that had spent a millennium proving its own superiority. But Yuji was there for one reason, not to fight Sukuna, not to defeat him on a spiritual plane, but to pull Megumi out. With every ounce of his will, Yuji reached for the fractured, trembling essence of his friend's soul. He gave it a single, powerful and desperate tug. The link between them snapped, and Yuji's soul returned to his own body. But he wasn't alone. A fragile, flickering light, Megumi's battered consciousness, had been pulled with him, held in his hands like a wounded bird. The final strike was not a blow, but an act of salvation. The plan was not to defeat Sukuna, but to circumvent him entirely. With Megumi's soul successfully extracted, the vessel was empty. The 10 Shadows technique, once a symbol of his tactical genius, now belonged to a body with a ghost of a soul. The chapter concludes with Sukuna's vessel, still standing, his eyes now vacant, his form devoid of the cursed energy that had so recently radiated from him. On the ground, Yuji knelt, holding the fragile light that was Megumi's consciousness, a look of profound exhaustion and relief on his face. The King of Curses was still there, his soul contained within the empty vessel. But the mission, redefined and executed against impossible odds, was a success. The world now faced a new question. What would they do with the King of Curses, and would Megumi ever truly heal? The next act of the collective war had just begun. Chapter 5. The Aftermath and the Culling Game's New Rules. The air, once thick with the oppressive cursed energy of Ryomen Sukuna, was now eerily thin, a vacuum left by the soul that had been ripped from its vessel. Yuji knelt on the ground, his body trembling with exhaustion. In his hands, a faint, flickering light pulsed, the sole testament to the impossible act he had just performed. It was Megumi's consciousness, a ghost of a soul, now safely extracted but tragically fractured. The body of the King of Curses, an empty shell, stood silent and motionless, its eyes vacant, a cruel monument to the sacrifices made. Around them, the other sorcerers stood in a state of suspended disbelief. They had planned for a decisive, final blow. Instead, they had witnessed an act of delicate, profound salvation. It was a victory, but a silent one. A success born not of overwhelming force, but of a surgical precision and a deep-seated love for a friend. Yuta was the first to move. He approached Yuji with a somber expression, his immense cursed energy now serving as a protective blanket around them. "He's out?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Yeah," Yuji said, his voice raw. He looked down at the ethereal glow in his hands. "He's with me. But he's not okay." His soul is broken. Shoko Ieri, their ever-present medical sorcerer, rushed forward, her hands hovering over the spiritual light. "It's unstable," she confirmed, her face etched with a mix of awe and concern. "It's like shattered glass. I can't heal a soul with reverse cursed technique. We can keep it stable, but to put him back, it's impossible. Not yet." The plan had succeeded, but it had not been without consequence. The moral imperative had been met. They had saved Megumi, but the King of Curses was still a threat. His empty vessel, now a ticking time bomb, contained a malevolent soul with access to the Ten Shadows technique. The strategic objective had shifted from annihilation to containment. The next question was chilling. What do you do with a god who has lost his vessel but not his power? The decision was made at a new council of war, one held not with the fear of imminent destruction, but with the grim reality of a prolonged, uncertain future. They could not kill the empty vessel without killing Megumi's soul. They could not seal it without risking its escape. The only option was to contain it. Hiromi Higuruma, the juridical mind, proposed a new, high-stakes game. They would use the very rules of the Culling Game against Sukuna. He would be contained within a new barrier, a custom-made domain that would act as a prison, with its own specific rules. The sorcerers would take turns acting as his warden, a rotating guard system designed to keep his immense power in check. This new Culling Game colony would become a crucible for the remaining sorcerers, forcing them to become stronger, to grow into the collective power they now represented. It was a terrifying, brilliant move. It would turn their greatest threat into a training tool, a dark star around which they would have to orbit and evolve. The new rules, a blueprint for containment, the Culling Game, Kenjaku's grand design, had been co-opted for their own purposes. The new rules were simple, brutal, and strategically sound. 1. The Warden's Challenge. A sorcerer must enter the new Culling Game colony and engage Sukuna's empty vessel for a predetermined period of time. This would force them to fight a being of godlike power without the risk of him using Megumi's body as a shield. 2. The Soul's Sanctuary, Megumi's fractured soul, would be placed under the protection of a specialized, non-violent domain, guarded by Shoko. This would give his consciousness time to slowly heal, with the hope that one day, he could be restored. 3. The Extraction Gambit. If Sukuna ever showed a sign of reincarnating into a new vessel, Yuji would be ready to perform the soul-swapping technique again, a last-ditch effort to pull Sukuna back into a controlled, contained state. This new strategic framework was a testament to the ideological shift that had taken place. Gojo's absence had forced them to move from a single point-of-failure model to a decentralized, resilient system. The fight was no longer a power-scaling duel, but a test of their collective ingenuity and perseverance. As the sun set on the Culling Game colony, the new era of Jujutsu sorcery began. Yuji sat alone, watching over the faint light of his friend's soul, a new purpose filling him. He was no longer just the boy who held a curse. He was the one who could save a soul. The defeat of Sukuna was not the end of the conflict, but the beginning of a long, arduous journey. The next chapter would not be about a single fight, but about a perpetual, evolving war, one where the lines between victory and sacrifice would be forever blurred. The stage was set, not for a grand finale, but for the rest of their lives. Chapter 6. The Broken God and the New World. The first month after the battle was a period of grim reconstruction and profound introspection. The sorcerers of Jujutsu High, once a clandestine society of powerful individuals, were now a publicly recognized emergency force. The Culling Game had been an international incident, and Sukuna's defeat, though not a true annihilation, was enough to turn the tide. The world, or what was left of it, had a new, terrifying boogeyman, but also a new, precarious hope. The new Culling Game colony, a custom-built prison in the heart of a barren landscape, was a marvel of jujutsu engineering. It was a self-contained barrier, its walls pulsating with complex cursed energy that allowed them to be porous to sorcerers but impenetrable to Sukuna's empty vessel. The Warden's challenge had been met with both courage and fear. The first to volunteer was Yuta Okotsu, whose vast cursed energy reserves made him the most suitable candidate for a prolonged engagement. Inside the barrier, the King of Curses was a paradox. He was a god without a body, a soul with a perfect vessel, yet trapped by the very rules he had once so masterfully exploited. He was a broken god. Yuta, using his copy technique, had acquired a deep understanding of the intricacies of the Ten Shadows. He engaged Sukuna's empty vessel in a dance of lethal precision, not to kill, but to learn. He learned the rhythm of its attacks, the subtle shifts in its cursed energy, and the horrifying truth of its power. The vessel, though empty, was a perfect conduit for the 10 shadows, and it wielded them with an unsettling, automated grace. Yuta was not fighting a soul, but a memory of one, a fighting style so ingrained in the vessel that it continued to exist. Meanwhile, back at the new Jujutsu High, the medical facility had been transformed into a spiritual sanctuary. Shoko Ieri worked tirelessly, her reverse curse technique a constant shimmering shield around the delicate, pulsing light that was Megumi's soul. She could not heal it, but she could protect it, keeping the fractured pieces from scattering completely. Yuji was a constant presence by her side, his hand never far from the spiritual light. He felt a unique connection to it, a resonance between his soul and Megumi's that was a direct result of the soul-swapping technique. He would sit for hours, talking to the light, telling it stories of their friends, of the battles, of the world outside, hoping that his words could somehow mend the broken pieces. One evening, after a particularly grueling warden's challenge, Yuta returned, his body battered but his spirit unbowed. He found Yuji alone, staring at Megumi's soul. "He still isn't talking," Yuji said, his voice flat. "It's like he's locked himself away. He's still broken." Yuta knelt beside him. The body, it's a terrifying thing. It fights with all of Sukuna's skill, but there's no intelligence behind it. Just pure, brutal reflex. He paused. It's a ghost of a fight, and that's what we have to be prepared for. He is a broken god now, but he is still a god. Yuji nodded. "I know." He looked at Yuta, his gaze intense. "But we have a chance. We have a chance to not just beat him, but to really save him. All of us." The new world was not perfect. Kenjaku's final plans were still a looming threat, and the Culling Game, even with Sukuna contained, was a global disaster. But for the first time, the future was not a predetermined path towards a single, cataclysmic duel. It was an open road, a series of challenges to be faced not by a lone hero, but by a collective of sorcerers who had learned the hard way that their greatest strength was in their unity. The era of Satoru Gojo was over. The age of the collective had just begun. The story had pivoted from a tale of immense individual power to a saga of resilience, of broken people finding strength in their shared purpose. The broken god was a reminder of their failure to act sooner, but he was also a symbol of their renewed determination. The Culling Game, once a tool for their destruction, had become a crucible for their evolution. Chapter 7: The Prisoner's Mind and the Sorcerer's Burden. The new era of the Culling Game was a perpetual, exhausting vigil. The sorcerers rotated through their duties as wardens of the new colony, each shift a brutal test of their physical and mental endurance. For all its strategic brilliance, the plan was a slow-motion descent into a new kind of hell. The enemy, Sukuna's empty vessel, was a perfect, unthinking machine, its movements dictated by a primal, instinctive malice. It was the purest form of martial combat, a battle with a ghost that could use the 10 shadows with a terrifying, flawless precision. It was Kinji Hikari's turn in the crucible. He had entered the barrier with his characteristic, manic energy, his mind already set on hitting a jackpot and getting a full 4 minutes of invulnerability. But the vessel was different. It didn't engage in intellectual combat. It simply moved with an unnerving, single-minded focus. It deployed the 10 Shadows Shikigami with a cold, strategic efficiency. The divine dog, Nue, and even a partially formed Mahoraga were used not as living weapons, but as tools for a brutal, relentless onslaught. Hikari was forced to use his domain not just as a tool for immortality, but as a defensive measure to keep the cursed spirits at bay. The constant pressure, the endless cycle of damage and regeneration, began to wear on him. It was a kind of psychological torture, a fight without a victory, a war without a single point of surrender. Outside the barrier, the atmosphere was just as tense. The sorcerers were a family, but they were also a group of individuals carrying an impossible burden. They had saved Megumi, but in doing so, they had condemned themselves to a life of endless vigilance. The stress was palpable. Discussions about tactics often devolved into arguments about the morality of their actions. Had they truly saved Megumi, or had they simply condemned him to a living death? Yuji, a ghost haunting the medical bay, was the living embodiment of their collective guilt and hope. He spent his days in silence, his hand hovering over the shimmering light of Megumi's soul. He had not only pulled his friend's consciousness out of the abyss, but he had also brought with him a fragment of Sukuna's dark essence. He saw things he shouldn't see, felt things he shouldn't feel. In his dreams, he was a king on a throne of bones, and the world was his to burn. It was a constant, internal war, a fight for his own soul. He had saved Megumi, but in the process he had trapped himself in a new kind of prison, a mental one. One morning, while Yuji was at the medical bay, he felt a faint ripple, a flicker of awareness from Megumi's soul. It was not a voice, but an image, a memory of his sister, her face distorted in pain. Yuji's heart sank. Megumi had not been saved. He had been trapped in a perpetual replay of his trauma. The soul-swapping technique had saved his life, but it had also locked his consciousness in a state of eternal suffering. Later that day, Yuji confronted the other sorcerers. "We have to do something," he said, his voice trembling with a mixture of anger and despair. "He's not healing, he's suffering. We have to go back in there and find a way to get him out completely. We have to finish this." Yuta, his face grim, placed a hand on his shoulder. "Yuji, we can't. Not yet. We don't have a plan. We barely survived the first time. Then we make a new plan," Yuji retorted, his voice rising in frustration. "We can't just leave him like this." The new chapter was not one of grand battles or strategic victories, but of internal conflict. It was a story of sorcerers who had won the war but lost their peace. The broken god was not the only prisoner. The sorcerers themselves, burdened by their moral choices and haunted by their sacrifices, were trapped in a new kind of culling game, a psychological one. The final chapter of their story was yet to be written, and it would not be about defeating a single enemy, but about saving a friend, and in the process, saving themselves from the monster they had become. Chapter 8. The Weight of a Broken Soul. The weight of Megumi's soul became a physical burden. Yuji, unable to leave its side, carried the glowing ethereal orb with him everywhere he went. He would sit in the shattered courtyard of Jujutsu High, now a solemn monument to their losses, and try to speak to the fractured consciousness. But his words were met with silence. The soul, a perfect representation of Megumi's mental state, was a storm of conflicting emotions: grief over Tsumiki's death, guilt over his own survival, and a profound, bone-deep weariness from being a passive witness to the horrors he had endured. It was a prison built by his own mind. The others noticed Yuji's slow decline. His smile, once a beacon of pure, unyielding optimism, was now a rare and fleeting expression. He was a ghost, haunted by a ghost. His physical training, once a fierce and disciplined regimen, had become a desperate attempt to outrun the demons that plagued his mind. He would spar with Maki, his punches infused with soul-damaging power, but his heart wasn't in it. Maki, with her superhuman senses, could feel the emotional turbulence in every strike. "You're not fighting to get stronger," she said one afternoon, her voice a low rumble. "You're fighting to forget." Yuji didn't answer. He simply landed a punch that sent a shudder through Maki's body. It wasn't a powerful blow, but it was a cold one, devoid of the warmth that had once characterized his every action. The strain of the warden's challenge began to take its toll as well. The sorcerers were powerful, but they were not invincible. Every shift inside the barrier was a gamble with their lives. Hiromi Higuruma, the brilliant jurist, returned from his turn with a deep gash on his arm, a grim souvenir from a too-close encounter with the Ten Shadows. He had won, not by fighting, but by a legal technicality, forcing the empty vessel into a temporary ceasefire. But they all knew it was a temporary solution. The god they had captured was learning, adapting. "We can't keep this up forever," he said, his voice quiet but firm as Shoko patched him up. "The vessel, it's a perfect machine. It learns from our every move. It's only a matter of time before it finds a way to break out, or to kill one of us." The greatest danger, however, was not from Sukuna's empty shell, but from the man who had created the Culling Game. Kenjaku remained a distant, terrifying threat. His goal, the fusion of humanity with a cursed spirit, was still an active project, and the Culling Game was merely the engine for its final phase. They had defeated Sukuna, but they had not stopped the world's end. The weight of that knowledge was an even heavier burden than the physical exhaustion of their daily battles. One night, Yuji sat alone in the courtyard, staring at the shattered moon. He held Megumi's soul in his hands, feeling its faint, erratic pulse. "Megumi," he whispered, "I don't know what to do. I saved you, but I feel like I broke you. I just want to." His voice cracked with a wave of emotion he could no longer suppress. In that moment of profound despair, A ripple of cursed energy answered him, not from Megumi's soul, but from his own body. It was a faint echo, a lingering essence of Sukuna's soul-swapping technique. He felt it not as a curse, but as a tool, a forbidden knowledge, an ability he had never fully explored. He had the power to reach into a soul, to pull it out, but what if he could do more? What if he could reach into his own soul? What if he could use the same technique, not to extract, but to mend? He looked at the broken soul in his hands, then at his own. He was the only one who could do it. The burden was his, and his alone. The others could fight, they could strategize, they could contain. But the final most crucial step, the healing of a broken spirit, was a task only he could undertake. The final chapter of their collective war would not be fought with punches or cursed techniques, but in the quiet, treacherous space of the human soul. Chapter 9. The Soul Surgeon. Yuji Itadori stood over the faint, glowing orb that contained the fractured consciousness of Megumi Fushiguro. The air in the sterile lab hummed with the quiet desperation of their situation. Shoko, her eyes heavy with exhaustion, watched him, a silent plea in her gaze. She knew what he was about to attempt was an act of jujutsu on a level they hadn't even conceptualized. It was not combat, it was spiritual surgery. Yuji closed his eyes and knelt, placing his hands a few inches above the shimmering soul. He had to go beyond his ability to simply touch and damage a soul. He needed to enter it, to navigate its shattered landscape, and to painstakingly mend its pieces. He had to become a surgeon of the spirit. He breathed in, his cursed energy coiling inward. He felt the familiar, cold presence of the technique he had learned from Kenjaku, and the echo of Sukuna's essence. He had used it once to pull Megumi out, but this time, he had to use it to go in. He released a soft, controlled burst of cursed energy. It wasn't an attack. It was an invitation, a handshake with the invisible world. As his cursed energy made contact with Megumi's soul, his consciousness was ripped from his body. The world around him dissolved into a chaotic swirl of light and shadow, and he found himself in a place of profound sorrow. He was inside Megumi's mind. The mental landscape was a desolate wasteland, a shattered mirror of a world that had once been vibrant. The sky was a bruised purple, and the ground was made of broken glass and jagged rock. He saw memories as he passed them, ghostly images flickering in the wind. He saw Megumi as a child, his smile wide and innocent. He saw him as a sorcerer, his face etched with grim determination. He saw his sister, Tsumiki, her face a beacon of warmth. And then, he saw her again, her eyes vacant, her body a vessel for a stranger. This memory was a vortex of pain, a maelstrom of regret and self-recrimination that had shattered Megumi's soul. Yuji took a step forward. He wasn't a physical presence here, but an ethereal one, a guest in a mind that was locked in a perpetual loop of self-torture. He called out to Megumi, his voice a disembodied echo. "Megumi, I'm here. You're safe." But there was no answer. A towering, spectral version of the Mahoraga Shikigami, a manifestation of Megumi's trauma, loomed in the distance, its sword of extermination raised in a silent, permanent threat. This was the curse Megumi had placed on himself, a punishing reminder of his perceived failure. Yuji knew he couldn't fight it. This was not a physical battle. It was a mental one. He had to reach Megumi, to remind him of the truth, of the reason they had fought so hard. He continued to move, avoiding the jagged pieces of shattered memories, searching for the core of Megumi's consciousness. He saw a small, huddled figure, curled up in a corner, his back to the world. It was Megumi, his essence reduced to a single point of despair. Yuji approached him slowly, his hand outstretched. "Megumi, look at me. We did it. You're free. Tsumiki, she's at peace now. It's over." The huddled form did not move. Yuji's heart ached. He had to do something more. He had to give him a reason to fight, a reason to come back. He took a deep breath, and using the technique he had only just discovered, he poured a part of his own soul into Megumi's broken one. Not a whole consciousness, but a memory. A moment. He sent him the memory of a rainy day, a simple moment of camaraderie when Yuji had given him a new shirt, and they had laughed together. He sent him the memory of their first training session, of the joy of finally finding a friend who understood. He sent him the memory of their collective fight, of their shared purpose, of the fact that he was not alone. The world around them shifted. The bruised sky softened. The broken glass began to shimmer and reform. Megumi's huddled form slowly uncurled, and for the first time, he turned. His eyes, though still clouded with pain, held a flicker of recognition. "Yuji," he whispered, his voice a cracked echo. "I'm here," Yuji said, a wave of relief washing over him. "We're all here. We're waiting for you. Come back. Come home." The Mahoraga in the distance began to shrink, its power fading as the despair that fueled it began to recede. The shattered mirror began to knit itself together. Yuji's act of spiritual selflessness was working. He was not only mending a broken soul, he was giving it a reason to live again. The chapter ended not with a bang, but with a quiet, powerful act of love, a testament to the new paradigm of Jujutsu sorcery, a world where the greatest power was not one of destruction, but of healing and unity. Chapter 10: The Return and the Catalyst. The week that followed Yuji's spiritual surgery was the quietest since the Culling Game began. Megumi's soul, once a chaotic maelstrom of sorrow and despair, was now a calm, steady light. The fractures were still there, like hairline cracks in a pane of glass, but they were no longer spreading. The soul was not whole, but it was stable. Yuji, physically and emotionally drained, slept for 3 days straight, a profound, dreamless sleep that was a testament to the immense burden he had just lifted. He had given a part of himself, a piece of his own soul's resilience, to mend his friend. On the 4th day, he awoke to a hushed urgency. The medical bay was a flurry of controlled chaos. He saw Shoko and Ieri, their faces a mix of professional focus and personal excitement, huddled over a new, custom-made, cursed object. It was a smooth obsidian stone, pulsing with a faint, steady beat of cursed energy. It was a vessel, not for a curse, but for a soul. "We have to do it now," Shoko said, her voice low. "The soul is stable. It's the best chance we'll ever have." They had devised a plan born of desperation and a fragile newfound hope. They would not try to return Megumi's soul to his original body, a vessel now irrevocably corrupted by Sukuna's lingering essence. Instead, they would transfer it to this new cursed object. It was a gamble, a new and untested form of soul containment. The soul would be a prisoner in a rock, but it would be a prisoner at peace, with the chance to one day, perhaps, be restored to a human body. It was a step, however small, toward a new life. Yuji, his heart pounding in his chest, watched as they laid Megumi's soul upon the stone. He placed his hand on it, and with a familiar ethereal pull, he performed a soul transfer, not from one body to another, but from a spiritual light into a physical object. The glowing orb shimmered, and then slowly, painstakingly, began to recede, absorbed into the obsidian stone. The stone pulsed once, twice, and then settled into a low, thrumming hum. They had done it. Megumi was safe. He was not whole, but he was no longer suffering. With Megumi's soul now contained, the final phase of their long-term plan began. Yuji's act had not only saved his friend, but had also changed the very nature of their war against Sukuna. The King of Curses was still a threat, but he was a contained threat, a prisoner with no leverage. They could not kill him, but they could contain him, perhaps indefinitely. The new Culling Game colony, the Warden's Challenge, their entire strategy had hinged on this. The King of Curses was no longer a human with a soul they had to protect. He was an empty, monstrous vessel, and he was finally, truly, alone. The final scene of the chapter takes place at the new Culling Game colony. Yuta, Maki, Hikari, Higuruma, and Hana stand outside the barrier, their faces grim but resolute. They had all been a part of this, a cog in the grand collective machine that had finally broken the unbreakable god. Yuji arrives, and with him, a new, unshakable sense of purpose. He carries the obsidian stone with Megumi's soul, and for the first time in months he smiles. It's not a full, unrestrained smile, but it's a genuine one, a symbol of a promise fulfilled. He places the stone on a small pedestal in the center of their gathering, a silent reminder of their victory, and of the reason they continue to fight. "He's safe," Yuji says, his voice clear and strong. "Now, we finish this." The chapter concludes with the unspoken understanding that the war was not over, but that the balance of power had irrevocably shifted. The single, unyielding threat had been broken into manageable pieces. The future was theirs to fight for, a future where they could not only defeat their enemies, but also heal their friends. It was the return of a hero, not as a lone champion, but as a catalyst for a new, collective age of Jujutsu sorcery. Chapter 11: The Kenjaku Revelation. The containment of Sukuna was a bittersweet victory. It had come at a great cost, and it had not solved their ultimate problem. Kenjaku, the malevolent mastermind, was still at large. The sorcerers were in a precarious position. They had removed the endgame threat, but the world-ending fusion of humanity with a cursed spirit was still a ticking time bomb. The silence from Kenjaku was unnerving. He had not reacted to the containment of his pawn. This, in itself, was a chilling omen. He was not a being to be trifled with, and his calm suggested he was already 10 steps ahead. The sorcerers gathered in a new war room, a secure, underground bunker far from the prying eyes of the world. They had to assume that the Culling Game was now a direct, personal conflict with Kenjaku. The question was, what was his next move? It was Shoko Ieri, their ever-present medical savant, who finally pieced together the fragments of a dark and horrifying truth. She had been meticulously studying Yuji's genetic and spiritual makeup, using her reverse curse technique not just to heal, but to peer into the very essence of his being. She had seen the strange echoes of his lineage, the residue of the many souls that had been a part of him. Her work had been a morbid archaeological dig into his past. "It's not just a vessel," she announced, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and awe. She projected a series of arcane diagrams and spiritual readings onto the wall. "Yuji, he's more than just a host. Kenjaku didn't just create a boy to contain Sukuna. He created a perfect, living prototype of his ultimate goal." The room fell silent. The horrifying realization settled over them like a shroud. Kenjaku's plan was not simply to fuse all of humanity into a single cursed spirit. He was planning to create a new species of being, a singular, all-powerful existence, a being of pure, raw, cursed energy. And Yuji, the boy they had all fought so hard to save, was the blueprint. "The soul-swapping technique," Higuruma whispered, his voice full of a dawning terror. "That's it. That's the key. Kenjaku gave him that ability not for us, but for him. He wanted Yuji to be able to manipulate souls, to be the final catalyst for his grand design." The truth was a bitter pill to swallow. Their victory over Sukuna was a part of Kenjaku's plan all along. He had used them as pawns, using their desperate fight to get a human who could manipulate souls to his final form. Yuji had not just saved Megumi, he had become the key to the world's destruction. Yuji, listening to the horrifying revelation, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He was a monster, a tool of destruction, and his very existence was a threat to everything he held dear. He had fought so hard, endured so much, only to find that his entire journey had been a part of a malevolent cosmic joke. He looked at the obsidian stone with Megumi's soul, and for the first time he felt not relief but a profound, crushing guilt. He had saved his friend, but at what cost? Had his very act of salvation brought the world one step closer to its end? The chapter ends with a chilling question. The sorcerers had prepared for a final battle with Kenjaku, but they had not prepared for the possibility that the final battle was inside them all along. The ultimate enemy was not a powerful sorcerer or a curse, but the curse that resided in the very nature of their existence. The final act was not about fighting, but about choosing a side in a war for the soul of humanity itself. Chapter 12. The Architect's Last Stand. The revelation of Yuji's true purpose sent shockwaves through the beleaguered group of sorcerers. They had spent so long fighting the symptoms, Sukuna, the Culling Game, that they had failed to see the disease itself. Kenjaku had not been a distant schemer, he had been a meticulous architect, and Yuji was the cornerstone of his grand design. The Council of War, once a hub of strategic planning, was now a somber gathering of broken people trying to make sense of a new, horrifying reality. "So what's the plan?" Yuji asked, his voice hollow. Do you put me down? Am I the last curse you have to exercise?" The question hung in the air, a testament to the profound despair they were facing. Yuta, the new leader, shook his head. "No, that's what Kenjaku wants. He wants us to kill our humanity to win. We can't do that." "But he's right," Higuruma interjected, his voice uncharacteristically sharp. "Yuji is the key. His ability to manipulate souls isn't just a powerful tool. It's a direct pathway for Kenjaku to initiate the fusion. The Culling Game has already reached a critical point. The cursed energy accumulating is enough. He just needs a final catalyst, and that's Yuji." The strategic dilemma was a moral one. They had to defeat Kenjaku, but they had to do so without sacrificing Yuji, the very symbol of their fight. The only way was to turn Yuji's cursed purpose into a weapon. They had to use the architect's blueprint against him. "We have to go to him," Maki declared, her hands gripping her cursed blade. "We can't wait for him to make his move. We take the fight to him. We destroy his plan at the source." The location of Kenjaku's final stand was not a secret. He was waiting for them at the very nexus of the Culling Game, a vast, swirling sea of cursed energy that had been the foundation for his ritual. It was a spiritual battlefield, a place where reality bent to the will of cursed energy. It was a domain without a barrier, an entire world-encompassing ritual. As the sorcerers approached the final battleground, Yuji felt a strange sense of calm. He was no longer fighting for a cause he didn't understand. He was fighting for himself. He had been a pawn for so long. Now, he was going to be the one to flip the board. The plan was terrifying in its simplicity. Yuji would use his soul-swapping technique not on a person, but on Kenjaku himself. He would try to reach inside the malevolent being, to find the original brain, the true consciousness, and to pull it out, to separate the core of the curse from the body it had inhabited for 1,000 years. The battle that ensued was not a conventional one. It was a fight against a being who could control cursed spirits, manipulate cursed energy, and use every technique he had copied over centuries. He was a perfect opponent, and he was amused by their futile attempts to stop him. "You've come to face me, my son," Kenjaku said, his voice a distorted, mocking echo of the many hosts he had inhabited. "This world is a canvas, and I am the artist. You are merely a brush. I'm going to be the one who erases you from existence," Yuji said, his voice cold and resolute. As the other sorcerers engaged Kenjaku's cursed spirits in a diversionary fight, Yuji made his move. He didn't use his fists. He used his cursed energy. He reached out, his soul manipulation technique a delicate, spiritual tendril that sought a connection. He found it, not in the body, but in the core of Kenjaku's mind, a small, pulsating brain at the very center of his being. With a final, desperate tug, he performed the soul-swapping technique. He pulled, and for a brief, horrifying moment, he saw it all. The thousands of years of planning, the countless lives ruined, the singular, unwavering goal of a being who wanted to be something more than a sorcerer. He felt the cold ambition, the godlike detachment, and the profound loneliness of an existence defined by a single, mad obsession. But he didn't pull the entire soul. He couldn't. The connection was too powerful. He pulled a piece, a fragment of a memory, the core of Kenjaku's ambition. He pulled the knowledge of the fusion ritual, the final stages of the Culling Game, and in doing so, he gained a terrifying new understanding. The fusion was not just about power, it was about breaking the world's final failsafe, an ancient barrier of celestial cursed energy. It was about creating a new kind of world. The chapter ends with Kenjaku, surprised and off balance, his mind momentarily disoriented by the spiritual assault. He was still a threat, but a wound had been opened. The sorcerers had not defeated him, but they had turned his most powerful weapon, Yuji, against him. The final battle was just beginning, and they now had the knowledge to stop the world's end. The burden was still there, but now, so was a glimmer of hope. Chapter 13. The Grand Design's final piece. The spiritual wound Yuji had inflicted upon Kenjaku was a game-changer, but it wasn't a fatal blow. The ancient sorcerer reeled, his consciousness momentarily fragmented, but he quickly reasserted control. He no longer viewed Yuji as a simple tool, but as a genuine personal threat, a variable he had not accounted for. The battlefield, once a stage for his performance, was now a true test of his genius. "You have seen what you shouldn't have seen," Kenjaku said, his voice now a low hiss of cold fury. "The final piece of my design, the ultimate act of cursed energy manipulation." The sorcerers had used their brief window of opportunity to fall back, regroup, and process the fragment of knowledge Yuji had pulled from Kenjaku's mind. They now understood the true nature of the fusion. It was not a physical transformation, but a spiritual one. The accumulated cursed energy of the Culling Game was not a weapon, it was a ritual. Its purpose was to bypass a final, unseen barrier that separated humanity from a higher state of existence. A celestial failsafe left by ancient sorcerers to prevent the world's self-destruction. The fusion was Kenjaku's way of tearing down that final wall. He was a god, a mad architect who wanted to create a new, cursed species. And the final catalyst, the very key to his plan, was the soul of Tengen. The revelation was a gut punch. Tengen, the immortal sorcerer who had long been the unassailable foundation of Jujutsu High, was the final piece of the puzzle. Kenjaku had not intended to use him as a simple power source, but as a spiritual anchor, a being whose boundless existence would stabilize the world-ending ritual. The new mission was clear. They had to reach Tengen before Kenjaku did. The race to Tengen's hidden chamber was a desperate, two-front war. Kenjaku, knowing their plan, threw every cursed spirit at them, every trick and technique he had copied over centuries. The sorcerers fought with a renewed sense of purpose, their exhaustion fueled by the terrifying knowledge of what was at stake. Maki was the vanguard, her perfected heavenly restriction a blur of motion, her cursed blade a silent death to the hordes of curses. Hakari, in a state of perpetual jackpot, became a one-man army, a regenerating force of nature that held the line against waves of monstrous spirits. Yuta and Higuruma worked in tandem, one using a copied version of Cleave and Dismantle to cut down their foes, the other using his domain expansion to trap and nullify the more powerful curses. Yuji, however, was the linchpin. His soul-manipulating punches were now a direct counter to Kenjaku's core abilities. He could not only damage the cursed spirits, but also destabilize their spiritual cores, rendering them easier to exorcise. He was the one who kept the path clear, his hands a constant, pulsating source of soul-shattering black flashes. They fought their way to the very heart of Jujutsu High's inner sanctum. The air grew thick with a sense of ancient power, and at the center of the chamber sat Tengen, a being of pure spiritual energy, his form indistinct and ethereal. "You are too late," Kenjaku's voice boomed from all around them, his presence a formless, oppressive weight. "The ritual has already begun. I am a part of Tengen now, a parasite in the body of a god. I will merge with his being and tear down the final wall." The sorcerers saw it then. Kenjaku was not a physical entity in the room, but a spiritual one, a part of Tengen's cursed energy, a cancer growing in the very foundation of their world. He was a piece of his grand design's final puzzle, and he was already in place. The chapter ends with the horrifying realization that their fight was not against a single person, but against an idea, a concept of power and reality that was already a step ahead of them. They had defeated Sukuna, but they had not defeated Kenjaku. The battle for the fate of humanity was no longer a physical one. It was a spiritual, philosophical conflict, and the final stage was set inside the mind of a god. The final battle was not about strength, but about an impossible choice. How do you defeat a foe who has become a part of the very world you are trying to save? Chapter 14. The Convergence. The air in the chamber of Tengen was a vortex of conflicting realities. Kenjaku's presence, now a parasitic consciousness merged with the immortal sorcerer, was an oppressive weight. His voice, a cacophony of distorted echoes, was everywhere at once. "This is the truth of my ambition," he boomed, a chilling sense of triumph in his tone. "To tear down the barrier and ascend. The age of Jujutsu sorcery is over. The new species is at hand." The sorcerers were at a terrifying disadvantage. They couldn't attack Kenjaku without also damaging Tengen, the very foundation of the Jujutsu world. It was a perfect checkmate. The battle was no longer one of brute force, but of intellectual and spiritual Jujutsu. "He's right," Higuruma whispered, his face pale. "We can't fight him here. He's a part of the spiritual tapestry of this place." But a new, unexpected possibility emerged, one born from the very knowledge Yuji had stolen. Yuji, his mind now a bridge between two worlds, felt a faint, pulsating rhythm. It was the cursed energy of the Culling Game, a vast, swirling sea of power that was converging on this very chamber, the final piece of Kenjaku's grand ritual. "It's not just a ritual," Yuji said, his voice quiet but firm. "It's a funnel. The Culling Game is bringing all that cursed energy here, to Tengen. It's a grand convergence. He's not fusing with Tengen to gain power. He's fusing with him to become a gate. He's going to open the world." The realization was a horrifying clarity. Kenjaku wasn't just planning to create a new species. He was planning to unlock the world, to allow all the malevolent curses and latent cursed energy to bleed into reality, a final, unceasing chaos. Hana Kurusu, her face etched with a mix of fear and resolve, took a step forward. My technique, Jacob's Ladder, it can extinguish cursed objects. What if Tengen isn't the problem? What if the cursed energy is? Yuta, his mind racing, understood her logic. If we nullify the Culling Game's cursed energy, we can stop the convergence. We can sever Kenjaku's connection before he completes the ritual. But there was a catch. The amount of cursed energy was immense, a sea of power that would overwhelm even Hana's technique. Yuta could copy it, but even their combined power would be a drop in an ocean. The only person with the raw, soul-shattering power to do it was Yuji. His ability to manipulate the soul was the key, the one thing Kenjaku hadn't accounted for as a tool of salvation. The cursed energy, it's all just a collective soul, Yuji said, a profound new understanding dawning on him. I can't destroy it, but I can redirect it. The new plan, born in the face of impossible odds, was a terrifying act of faith. Yuji, using his soul manipulation technique, would act as a spiritual siphon. He would absorb all the cursed energy of the Culling Game, all the malevolent power that had been building for months, and pull it into a single point. It was an act of godlike power, a gambit that would either save the world or tear his own soul to pieces. The others took their positions. Maki and Hikari would hold the line against Kenjaku's remaining spirits, buying Yuji the time he needed. Higuruma and Hana would use their abilities to create a defensive barrier, a spiritual shield to protect him from the backlash. Yuta, with his immense cursed energy, would act as a power source, a final failsafe if Yuji's body couldn't handle the immense strain. The chapter ends with Yuji, his eyes closed in a state of absolute concentration, extending his hands. The air around him begins to hum, and from the edges of the chamber, a river of dark, swirling, cursed energy begins to flow. It was the sum total of every battle, every death, and every curse born from Kenjaku's ritual. The final convergence had begun, and the fate of the world rested on one boy's ability to hold a raging storm within his soul. The war was no longer against a curse or a man, but against a concept, the very nature of evil itself. And Yuji, the boy who was born to be a vessel, was now a conduit for the world's salvation. Chapter 15. The Vessel of the World. The vortex of cursed energy was a hungry beast, a swirling maelstrom of malevolence and despair that converged on Yuji. He was no longer just standing in a room. He was at the eye of a cosmic storm. The cursed energy from every single Culling Game colony, the deaths, the pain, the chaos, was flowing toward him, a river of dark power seeking its ultimate destination. Kenjaku watched, a formless presence in the very essence of Tengen, his glee palpable. He had planned for a final fusion, a transcendence of humanity, but he had never conceived of this. Yuji, the boy he had designed as a tool, was now a bottleneck, a single point of failure for his entire grand design. Yuji felt the immense, crushing pressure of 1,000 curses and 1,000,000 fragments of shattered souls. His body, his mind, and his spirit were being tested in a way no living being had been before. He was a dam trying to hold back an ocean. He could feel the malignant echoes of the cursed spirits, their rage, their sorrow, and their desire for nothingness. He felt the cold, calculating ambition of Kenjaku, a parasitic consciousness trying to worm its way into his being. But he held firm. The burden he had carried for so long, the weight of Sukuna's soul, the pain of his friend's sacrifices, was no longer a curse. It was a shield. His body, the perfect vessel, did not break. It was not designed for this, but it adapted. His cursed energy, a unique and potent blend, began to hum in sync with the maelstrom, not to be consumed by it, but to control it. The other sorcerers were fighting a desperate battle to buy him time. Maki was a blur of motion, her cursed tool, the split-soul katana, a gleaming light in the darkness, severing the physical manifestations of the curses Kenjaku threw at them. Hikari, in a state of perpetual jackpot, was an unkillable wall of regeneration, drawing the attention of the most powerful cursed spirits. Yuta and Higuruma worked in perfect tandem, their domains and copied techniques creating a shield of pure, protective power around Yuji, a final line of defense against a foe that was everywhere and nowhere. As the last of the cursed energy from the Culling Game flowed into him, Yuji felt a strange, profound peace. He was a vessel, not just for a curse, but for the world's pain. He could feel every single life lost, every single tear shed, In every single moment of hope, he had shouldered the world's curse, and now he had a choice. He could release it, letting it bleed into reality and bringing about Kenjaku's plan, or he could contain it, burying it deep within his being, becoming a permanent prison for the world's despair. The voice of Kenjaku, once so full of triumph, now held a note of genuine horror. "What are you doing? You're not a funnel. You're a jailer. You can't contain all of it. You'll break." "I won't," Yuji replied, his voice a low, resolute rumble that shook the very foundations of the chamber. "I've been a vessel my entire life. I was meant to hold Sukuna, a king of curses. But now, I am a prison for the world's curse. I will contain it all, and then I will trap you in it." With a final, gargantuan effort of will, Yuji performed the soul-swapping technique one last time. He did not pull Kenjaku out. He pulled the cursed energy he had just absorbed and, with a precision that was chilling in its finality, he forced it to converge on the fragmented essence of Kenjaku inside Tengen. The fusion that Kenjaku had so desired was now his ultimate prison. The cursed energy that was meant to be his key to godhood became the chains that bound him. He was trapped, not just in a body, but in a spiritual maelstrom of his own making, his ambition a cage for his consciousness. The chamber fell silent. The air was still and clean. The world was safe. Yuji stood there, his body glowing with a faint, ethereal light, the cursed energy of the Culling Game now a part of him, a silent internal storm he would have to live with forever. The war was over. The final boss had been defeated. The world had been saved, not by a single hero with overwhelming power, but by a collective of sorcerers who had learned to work together, to rely on each other, and to turn a single boy's curse into the world's greatest salvation. The final chapter was not about the end, but about the beginning of a new, uncertain future. A future where the strongest person was not the one with the most power, but the one who could carry the greatest burden. Chapter 16. The end of the war, the beginning of peace. The silence in the chamber was not just the absence of noise. It was the cessation of a war that had spanned centuries. The vortex of cursed energy was gone, absorbed into Yuji Itadori. The oppressive presence of Kenjaku was no more, his consciousness a single, lost echo in the vast sea of a self-contained curse. The sorcerers stood in awe, their bodies battered, their minds exhausted, but their spirits unbroken. They had faced down the greatest threats in their world, the king of curses, and the mad architect of its destruction, and had won. Yuji, the world's new vessel, sank to his knees. The faint, ethereal glow that emanated from him was not a sign of power, but of an immense internal pressure. He had contained the storm, but the storm still raged. His cursed energy was no longer just his own. It was the sum total of every malevolent thought, every single curse from the Culling Game. He was a prison of despair, but in this prison, there was also a profound peace. He had saved them. He had saved everyone. Yuta was the first to reach him, his hand trembling as he placed it on Yuji's shoulder. He felt it, a colossal, unyielding reservoir of power that was terrifying in its scope, yet was held in perfect, unshakable balance. "You did it, Yuji," he whispered, a tear of relief and awe in his eye. "You saved us all." The others gathered around, their faces a mix of exhaustion and triumph. Maki, her knuckles scraped raw, simply laid a hand on his back in a silent show of solidarity. Hikari, his manic energy finally spent, leaned against a wall, a single, exhausted laugh escaping his lips. Higuruma and Hana, their roles as the tactical specialists fulfilled, looked at him with a respect that transcended their previous strategic alliance. The next few weeks were a blur of recovery and reorganization. With Kenjaku and his Culling Game nullified, the Jujutsu world was in a state of unprecedented chaos. The barriers were gone, the colonies were no longer sealed off, and the cursed spirits that had been part of the ritual were either exorcised or contained within Yuji. The balance of power was gone, and a new one had to be forged. The sorcerers, once scattered and fighting for their lives, came together. Yuta, as the new figurehead, worked with the remaining elders to establish a new council. Their new paradigm of collective strength and ethical responsibility became the core of this new world. Jujutsu High was no longer a secret society. It was the central hub for a new generation of sorcerers who would be trained not to be solitary heroes, but to be a part of a team, to understand that their power was meant to serve, not to dominate. As for Yuji, his new role was a quiet, solitary one. He was a living vault, a spiritual anchor for a world that was slowly beginning to heal. He could still fight, his punches now carrying a world-ending power he was too afraid to use. He was a hero, but a tragic one, a living monument to the war he had won. He spent his days watching over Megumi's soul, now contained in the obsidian stone, a constant, flickering reminder of the friend he had saved, but could not return to. The final scene of the chapter is a quiet moment of reflection. Yuji sits on a cliff overlooking the rebuilt city, the wind whipping through his hair. He holds the stone in his hand, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had saved the world, but he had lost his simple life. The world was at peace, but his own was a complicated, beautiful mess of a burden. The war was over, but his own journey had just begun. He was no longer a pawn. He was the protector. And as the sun set, he felt the weight of the world, not as a curse, but as a promise. The story was over, and the legend had just begun.